Hello everybody, welcome back to Quest for Truth. Today we're continuing our series looking at the 10 Commandments, and the last few weeks we've looked at the first 5, and now we get into the last 5. And these are the kind of more simple commandments, the more direct commandments. There's not a whole lot to them, but we're going to get into them and we're going to look and see what we can find about these commandments that deal with other people. And the first ones are the more vertical commandments to deal with God, and these ones are the horizontal commandments to deal with other people. And so we find ourselves here, Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. Very simple, 4 words: you shall not murder. Now we first have to talk about what it doesn't mean and what it does mean, because this often gets mistaken to say something that it doesn't, or to mean something that it doesn't. The word murder there is a lot of times taken and switched around with the word kill, but that's not accurate to what this text means. And so when it says you shall not murder, it means murder there means a preconceived notion to go out and kill someone in cold blood. So to kill, you could kill someone in self-defense, in a manner that is right, but you can't murder someone in a manner that is right. Murder is always wrong. It's, the idea of killing someone outside the bounds of, self-defense or legality, that kind of nature. And so that's what it is and isn't. But so what is it based on? I think that's the important thing, because especially this command of not taking a life in cold blood, it's based off of Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, and that we're made in the image of God. And so because we are image bearers, all of humanity are image bearers of God, we have a special worth to us that is intrinsic, that cannot be, removed or added at any point. And so, from the point of conception on, we have this image of God that is with us, that makes it so that the murder of a human being is wrong. And that's really, it's interesting how that kind of bases off who God is and who God created us to be, because he is who he is and he made us in his image. Therefore, we shall not kill what God has made in his image without reason to do so, without we should not murder, those who are made in his image, because of who he is. And I think that's interesting how the first commandments about who God is, really, you have to look at those first. Obviously, we're going through an order, but if you take it out of order and start looking at, you shall not murder first, you kind of lack that, well, who is God? Who we're made in God's image, but what does that really mean? And what does, how do we even, do this? How do we do this? Well, it's because if we obey the first commandments about God, then this is really the natural next progression to the people who are made in God's image. So remember when God said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. That order is important because God is the basis of why we love others like we would love ourselves, because we're made in his image. The idea of the Old Testament murder is built upon in the New Testament when Jesus came and he's preaching his Sermon on the Mount, and starting in Matthew 5, and he's speaking about that he didn't come to abolish the law, he came to fulfill the law. And then he has a number of times, and we've looked, I think, at one or two of these, but times when he says, you were told this, but I tell you, and he doesn't change the law. He doesn't make it to mean something, to say something that it doesn't say, but he really expands it to say, we'll just look at it here, Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 21 to 24. You have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. So when we think about murder, we think about kind of this big sin, this idea of, well, you can't just murder someone. That's that's morally wrong, and you obviously legally wrong. And so if you murder someone, you'll not only go to jail, but be held accountable before God. But Jesus here says it's not just about murder, it's about much more than murder. If you are angry with your brother, if you hate your brother, if you call him a fool, right, you act on that anger. And so when you kind of understand in this sense, murder is acting on anger. It's acting on hatred. And so Jesus here really says the problem isn't first and foremost with the murder. The problem is first and foremost with the intention of your heart to hate someone, to be angry with someone, to the extent that you would act on that anger. The murder is really the secondary effect of the hatred, and that can come out as calling them good for nothing, or you fool. Really, when you look at the original languages there, it's more of it's really calling them something like we would often, a lot of times you'd hear someone use cuss words or something, saying those kind of things, but really that just letting out that hatred towards that person and calling them things that are wrong. But again, Jesus points us back to not the action, but the intention of our hearts to say or to do these things. It is the heart that wants something, the heart that is angry or hateful, and then the action off of that is the secondary effect. And so Jesus says it's not just that secondary effect that is wrong. It's not just the thing that you do, but it's really that first effect of your heart in saying, I'm angry or I feel hate towards someone. That's really, not only is that the problem, the center of the action, but it's also the center of the wrong committed before God. And so, God sees the heart. God knows our heart. And so God, before man, before a judge can't say you're guilty of hatred. A judge can only say you're guilty of what you did because of that hatred or anger. But God, who sees our hearts, knows when we are angry and when we are hateful, and he can say that we're guilty of that. And so it's before God, it's not just the outward, but it's the inward. And God is concerned with our inward being. And so as we today, as Christians, look at, you shall not commit murder, what does it mean? It means that we shouldn't be angry with people, that we shouldn't hate other people. We should, as far as it depends on us, be peaceful with other people, and have, again, as far as it depends upon us, to have right relationships with other people. We shouldn't be cutting other people down, or fighting against them, but we should be building each other up as much as we can, and loving each other. And that starts in our heart. That starts, when if you start with the murder and try to say, I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to do good things for you, but that doesn't affect your heart. And so now you're just kind of doing something, well, because you have to do it. But if you go back and realize, I shouldn't hate this person because they're made in the image of God, especially if they're a child of God, they're a brother or sister in Christ, then we should love them. And when we love them, then instead of doing bad things to them, we'll end up doing good things to them, and our good works will be to them. And so Jesus is about correcting our heart against the anger and hatred that we as human beings feel as part of our depravity. We do feel hatred, and it can rise up very quickly in anger. And those things can be, rightfully at times, but we understand that here he's talking about anger that is not rightful. Like we talked about with killing versus murder, there's a just anger, and it's a very fine line for a human being to draw between just anger and unjust anger. But there is some just anger, but he's talking about here of the unjust anger that brings us to hate people who are made in God's image, who we should love, who God told us to love our neighbors and to do good to them and not harm. And so that's really what it means for us to not murder, is to love our neighbors and to do good to them. See you next week.